Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to the VET S.O.S network. Remember, you do not have to drown in the sea of transition. Grab that VET S.O.S lifeline. And this is brought to you by the Who You Know Network. You know, today, sitting on the stoop, we're going to get the scoop. Strap in, folks, because it's coming live, hot, and it's coming because we have a special guest here. He is a battlefield-tested strategist who's gone from the front lines of military service to the high-stakes trenches of modern marketing. Lee Peppers is the author of this hard-hitting book, Never Outmatched, a guide that fuses the time-honored tactics of military leadership with ruthless realities of business today. With a career forged through service, strategy, and storytelling, Lee brings the heat, challenging leaders to think like commanders, act with precision, and win without excuses. His philosophy? Whether you're leading a squad, a team, or a brand, you're in the fight. And today, here to equip you, me, and everybody else listening, the tools to outmaneuver, outthink, and outlast the competition. So buckle up. This ain't business as usual. This is the war-minded marketing for modern-day missions. Ladies and gentlemen, my man, Lee Peppers. Lee, how you doing today? I'm sorry, so I could run through 10 walls right now because this book right here, never, y'all see it right here, never outmatched, right? Like you see the army men right here. It's strategies from day one. So, but before we start, Lee, let me just,
I'm doing fabulous.
The scoop on you a little bit.
I'm so pumped up.
You sent the information over, but
put my jersey
share
on
the
and get back
scoop
out on the
about
court or something.
Mr. Lee Pepper on here, so we know who you are, and then we're gonna dive into your book.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm just so honored to be a part of the VET S.O.S community. Let me say that first. You know, I think for me, you know, I grew up in an Army family. My father was 26 years retired Army, and so I kind of always had in the back of my mind that I was going to serve. And I went to college freshman year, took another year off to enlist. I was a 76 Yankee supply clerk. Then I came back and finished up school, and then through that process, while still serving in the reserves, I went to officer candidate school and then got commissioned as an armor officer. And then when I was going to work in the corporate world, I was fortunate that I got connected with Ross Perot, who was very, very pro-military. Almost everybody I worked with there was a veteran. And I think that was a great opportunity for me because like we were talking off camera, I said yes to everything. Every bit of training, I didn't care. Assignments, send me wherever. In fact, you said you served in North Dakota. I got sent to North Dakota, by Ross on a campaign mission one time. So at first I thought, wow, they must not like me. They're sending me to North Dakota, but it was a great experience. But and then as I kind of just developed my career, I was always just very entrepreneurial in my spirit. And then I was fortunate to get some roles as a chief information officer, then a chief marketing officer, and just very fortunate to have worked with some really good teams. And I always had these military strategies that I had learned during my service.
For the ones who just now tuning in, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, because you're gonna see this plus a lot more from Lee.
And
Lee's gonna come back.
That was something that I wanted to share
about 4 or 5
with people,
hours
and that's why I
on his
took
book. So I
time
know we're gonna
to
keep it down to try
devote
to
and
keep
write
the
this
45
book, and
minutes
then
to an hour.
go find a publisher, and
Lee,
then get it out to the
Let's
world.
talk about the cover right here. Let's start off with this. Like what made you like, you know what? I'm gonna come out with this book, and I'm gonna label it this, and I'm gonna come out with this infographic right here.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I'll tell you the when we were working with a publisher, everybody's got their own ideas about what they want to title it, but I had a quote in there: "Determine today that you will never be outmatched," and that was something that I use personally in the companies that I would work with, because I would hear from my teams, "Well, Lee, I don't have enough budget, or I don't have enough schedule, or Lee, we're not in that market." And I would always relate to them, well, guess what? In the military, you don't have it perfect either. And the one thing that you do have is that your personal determination that you're not going to be beat that day, that you're not going to be never outmatched, that you can be creative, that you can be innovative. And a lot of people miss that in the military. A lot of times when people would find out that I served, they would be like, "Oh, you don't seem like you're military type." And I'm like, I don't know what you mean by that.
Yes.
I mean, because the people that I was around, they were always creative. They were always innovative. Yeah, we're hierarchical, and we have great training, and we know the
Mm.
mission. But when it comes down to, whether you're in battle or you're in a training exercise, sometimes you got to pivot. Sometimes you got to have that freedom of movement. And it's what's up here that
Right.
gets
And
you
you
and,
start off
and
the
your
book
platoon or
by
your
you start
company,
off with
through it.
first your
And that's what
preface
I
and
always
and
try to
and,
get
and
across
all
to
you
my
give
corporate teams.
your
It's like,
shout
I
outs
don't want to
to
hear
all your
belly
peoples
aching
that
about
helped you
the
out, your
budget.
family
Let's
and
go and
stuff.
be creative.
But you
Let's look at the
start out
budget
with
again. We
chapter
have to
one,
move on.
and
We
I
got
always tell people
competitors that
like
are
when
that
I
are
know when a book
snapping
is
at our
gonna be
heels. We
good,
got to
I go
go.
straight to chapter one, right? I was like, okay, if chapter one is gonna be great, I'm going through all the chapters. So you started out outnumbered, but never
Yeah.
outmatched. What inspired you, like by starting off like, you know what, I need this to be chapter one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
hmm Yeah, it has a lot to do with, when I talk a lot about one of the companies that I was at, Foundation Recovery Network. We were a small player in the behavioral health
Mm.
space, and we ran
Right.
and managed drug and alcohol treatment centers and trauma centers. And all of a sudden, when you're building a small company, you don't have the big bucks. You don't have all the team. You don't have all the training. So in a sense, you are outnumbered, but you can't just go home. You can't just sit in your foxhole and cry about it. Like you've got to figure out how to be innovative and how to be creative. And so that was really what I was trying to explain in that opening chapter. In the very first sentence of the book is me recanting
Right.
what happened at Fort Knox. Like that first day that they put you in a tank and you've never been in a tank before, you don't know anything about them, and all of a sudden the staff sergeant, at that time when I went through in the early '90s, he's the Vietnam vet. He is totally not impressed that you're a
A
second
decision,
lieutenant.
right?
He could care less. And he starts yelling, "Lieutenant, what are you going to do now?" And he starts counting down. And, it's a real thing. And it's like, he's not necessarily trying to get us to
Mm.
make a certain decision. He's trying to get us to make a decision, because indecision is what can hurt you on the battlefield, and what it can hurt you in a training exercise. And in the corporate world,
Right.
indecision
And you
erodes
talk in
trust.
chapter one,
And if you don't
in
have the
the
trust of your
world of like
team, of your
resource gaps, right?
C-suite, of
Because
your
we
board
talked
of
about that
directors,
before we
all of a sudden they
came
lose
on, is like,
confidence in you. And
how to
that's
apply that
really what that
military
staff
mindset
sergeant, when
to
he's yelling at it and he's counting us
outpace the
down,
larger
that's really what
competitors,
he's
right?
trying to
Because
instill in us, is that
as a
we're going
veteran,
to
or
make a
I'm
decision.
sure when you was getting into the publisher space, or you was getting into the civilian sector from the military, you had to think, like you said, outside the box. Like, how can I
hmm
be resourceful with the information I have? Because I'm going against some big dogs, right? Like, how do I maximize that? So what's the scoop on that? Like, how would you share that information of having that military mindset to outpace the larger competitors? Right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think veterans, we're like Swiss Army knives. And I think sometimes we don't realize that about ourselves, and that you've got all these little tools that
Right.
are inside this brain of ours that we just need to access. And
Mm.
I think that that's what I'm really trying to get out. And when I'm trying to also, train and inspire my civilian teams, because listen, less than 1% of Americans will serve in the military. And I don't say that as a judgment. I say it as just a fact of an all volunteer army. So that means these things that are very familiar to you and I are not familiar to 99% of
Mm,
people that you're working with in the civilian world. And so there is a way that we can communicate these bigger strategies that I
right.
think can
And one of the
inspire
things
them.
that I wrote
And then all of a
down
sudden,
and
I
that kind
found
of
that my
jogged my
teams
memory
were
is
very
you put
open
it's
to
not the size of the
parroting
force,
some of
but the
these ideas,
clarity
these
of the
strategies
mission,
that I
right?
was
Because you
bringing.
talk
Whereas
about the
if you
1%,
go in
and
there
I
trying to
definitely
tell them
agree
what to
with you when you
necessarily,
say
you're
like
trying to
you're not
micromanage, it
saying
might not
about the
be.
99%, but it's a small percentage that comes in, right? That serves, right? And we have a cap, right? I tell people like the military does have a cap.
Yeah.
They can't be, there's a certain number they can't go over. So it's still, by law, it's that 1%, if you think about it. But you talk about it's not the size of the force, but the clarity of the mission, right? Because you have to do, more with less, or, you have a small demographic, but then you're handling a large mission on the world scope, on the world stage. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, when you're in the corporate world,
Yeah.
you're always, trying to like grow revenue as an example, but you're
Mm,
not always given this big budget up front. You kind of have to kind of build into it. And I think that that's where there are so many great stories that I mentioned in the book where there were military leaders that had very small forces, but they used their ingenuity to go and attack and win. And that's what we have to do in the corporate
right.
world too. They're not going to just all of a sudden give you the budget. They're not all of a sudden going to give you all the staff or all the training. And so you have to instill in your
Wow.
team that we're going to go and we're going to be creative and we're going to earn the right. You're going to kind of earn our seat at the table. And I have found that I mean, and at foundations, I mean, we proved it. I mean, we returned 60 times to our investors, and we sold at a record valuation when we exited in 2015. And
Wow.
it
And that
wasn't because
goes
they
right into
gave
line
us
because you talk about
everything we
tank
needed up
commander
front,
being
right? We had to
coming through
be
the ranks
creative
as
and
a
innovative,
young
and we
LT,
kind
but
of grew into the
you move
opportunity.
into
And that's what
chapter
allowed us
two,
to kind of go from
commander's
just
intent.
3 small centers to covering the whole
It's
country when
it's
we
like having
exited.
a direction, right? So why is commander's intent a non-negotiable for business teams? Like, like to know what the CEO, what the C-suite needs and wants, especially if you're a supporting team member.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Mm,
Because, the CEO is not there to do your job. The CEO is there to give you the commander's intent, and then you're to give your commander's intent all the
right.
way down the line. And if you're not giving that commander's intent, and a lot of civilians don't understand this concept, and so you have to practice it. And when you can use it in the example of a lot of these strategies, I translate into mental models. Because when you say military strategy, sometimes people's eyes roll
Mm,
back in their head. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But when you can use it as a mental model, all of a sudden people go, "Oh, I get that." Because most
mm,
people today, I'm 56, and I love working with millennials and Gen Z. Most of my contemporaries do not. And it's because they don't give commanders intent. They want to micromanage. And so I want to give the mission, and I want them
mm,
to go take that hill. And that's where you see all these I think these struggles about people
mm,
that working remote or not remote, or
mm.
oh my god, my team wants me to do TikTok, why would I do that? I would say, why do you care? Because if your mission is to go
Right.
grow
And
revenue,
you
or your mission
just hit
is
the
to
nail
finish
on the
this
head because that's
project.
why I wrote down in one of my
Now, I'm not
notes,
saying
like,
you go outside of
wow,
good governance or
actually,
you break
like
the
the
budget.
difference
You've
between
got to maintain
direction
that
and
discipline.
micromanage
But
because
you need to let your
every
team go out and
um
accomplish the mission and win it
I
for
don't
you.
want to say age group, every generation, right? The every generation receive information differently, right? So have that direction and micromanagement to actually have the difference to let people know what's the difference. So in your travels through your journey,
Yeah.
and definitely in the corporate environment, how did that bring like forth that revenue, that direction between the direction and micromanagement? Like, because I know that's what a lot of our transition service members, or somebody that's about to transition from military to back to civilian life, is like the unclear, right? Because it means different. What
Mhm.
I know, like being in the military, then once you transfer over to the corporate side. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's where, I hope this book will serve
Yeah.
as and people can go, oh, I see how I learned this strategy, whether it's force multiplication or commander's intent.
Mm.
I need to translate that into a mental model that the civilian world can understand it. And another great example in there is like, doing the read back. Like that doesn't happen in the corporate world a lot.
Yes.
A lot of times you might just get a memo or, or an email. And so I think it's one of these good practices
Yes.
though, when you're with your team and you're talking about and you're giving your commander's intent, ask for the read back. Because it's almost like playing, but see, they're not going to know what the read back is. So you might have to say, well, it's like playing the telephone game. I want you to just repeat back to me what you just said. And then all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And all of a sudden they realize that, yeah,
Right.
this is good. And the thing is, you're also getting them as young leaders to start practicing these time-honored traditions, because it's not like the United States Army just invented these ideas last year. Like, some of these principles are thousands of years old. And a lot of times people will ask me, when I'm on an interview, or if I'm doing a talk, they'll say, "Well, Lee, what do you have on your nightstand? What's the latest you're reading? What's the latest and greatest?" And I mentioned this in the book. I always
Right.
say, "Well, I've got Caesar's
Right.
commentaries on the
And you
Gaelic
put
War
in
sitting
there,
beside my
when you
bed."
communicate
I'm
intent,
always
you
looking back
empower
at these
action.
time-honored strategies and trying to think, how can I apply that today? Because they really do work.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because again, if you're going to be micromanaged, like, no,
Right.
and I believe this wholeheartedly, that when you're hired for a role,
Right.
that your leader or your board or
Mhm.
your CEO, they didn't hire you for the status quo, because they probably hired you because there's something that had been going wrong with the previous person. So why would
Yes.
you just want to adopt the status quo? That doesn't mean you go off and start doing crazy stuff, but you were hired to be innovative. You were hired to be
Yes.
creative. And if you're a veteran, you were hired because you can think on your feet, because you are that Swiss Army knife. So let's use all the tools at your
Mhm.
disposal. And there are some great things about the military, like training. I find a lot of companies really cut back on training, but it's so critical and so important. And that's why I use a lot of these analogies in the book, so that whenever I would be in a meeting and somebody would
You don't
push
want to
back,
have a jam.
but the CEO or the CFO were pushing back, I would bring out these analogies. I use the analogy of the M16 in the Vietnam War. It's like, why do you need to do PMCS? Well, let me tell you about what happened. And you know what happens? They would sit back in their chair and they go, "Oh, Pepper's quoting von Clausewitz and Patton. We give up."
Yeah, and you just transition right
But all of
perfect
a sudden,
into
it does
when you put
start
in
to
chapter 3,
connect some of these
citizen
ideas and
farmer,
give them some
citizen
gravitas
soldier.
that I think people then go,
Because
"Okay, he
it
might know what he's
connects the
talking about. We'll
legacy
we'll
of
give him a
duty,
little more
right?
rope."
So how do you draw the citizen soldier ethos? Like, that's, because I was just thinking about, wow, when I came in the military,
Yeah.
I had to, I'm from the East Coast, and my
Mhm.
first base was Alaska, right? So I went from Northeast to
Mhm.
far another side, right? So how I was thinking to myself, like, how do I make sure that Kings is not lost, but still give part of Kings, but then I know I'm under a structure. So what did
Yeah.
you kind of wanted to share about when you talked about citizen farmers, citizen soldier? Yes, right.
I think people don't realize what a family being in the service is like,
Mm,
and that you really develop this structure. And so even when you're off, you're not really off. You're part of that family, of that commitment. And I think for most of our companies, it's that way too. But we've somehow created in a lot of our corporate culture this
mm,
break. And so that's where I wanted to kind of bring back in and use the example of how I reconnected our corporate culture, so that we could
yes,
leverage our citizens, as not just citizen farmers, but when we needed them to be active, we activate them as citizen soldiers. And I use the example of the Minutemen, on the Revolutionary War, and of course all the Roman soldiers were farmers. And when they need it, it's the same thing
yes,
in the corporate world. When we need your help in marketing, then I know that because you love working here and you're loyal and we're also providing great benefits and opportunities for you, that you're going to be there to help us in marketing. Or if it's, hey, we need
Yeah.
somebody to go speak at the school or at this career fair or go to this vet fest, that you're just going to go
Yeah.
and just want to do it, not because you've been assigned. And that's where I use a couple of examples that do a great job. Starbucks does an amazing job. I
Yes.
mean, when you work at Starbucks, it's not just a 9 to 5. Like, you are really giving a lot of yourself, and
Yes.
Starbucks
And you said,
recognizes that, and they have
I've
great
written
training
down
and
brand
go
loyalty is
finish
won
up
by
your
those who
degree.
show
And
up, serve,
that's
and
where I think
so over
companies
time.
miss out on activating their citizen farmers to be citizen soldiers when they need them.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Start there.
It's kind of funny that a lot of companies, they question, I wonder
Start there.
why we don't have brand loyalty
It's
with our
amazing about,
customers.
like you said,
How about
the
you
little
look
things,
at
the
the
stuff that
brand
we see every
loyalty
day,
of
stuff that
your
we're part of every
employees
day,
and their
and why
families?
is
Like,
service
if you
before
start
self still
there,
relevant in
that's how
marketing,
you'll win
right?
that.
Because so
Absolutely.
in the Air Force, right, we have I call it our three rules, right? Integrity first, service before self, excellence in all you do and all we do. But I wrote that question down. Like how does that play a factor? And definitely inside of chapter 3.
Yeah, I think I think for
Mm,
people that are at companies and they're struggling, like, why am I only getting 6 hours of work when they're supposed to be here at 8? Or why is it that when I need this report and it's Friday, they tell me it'll be Monday? And I say you really have to look back at yourself, how you develop the team, and the company has to look back at how they
right,
develop that culture. Because most of the places I've been, we've instilled, right, this culture where we're going to support you, and then in time of need we'll give you time off. If you need training, we'll get you training. But also when the company has a time of need, like, we expect you to want to, pitch in. And I think that gets lost, and people will tell you it can't be done. They'll tell you, well, we've got compliance, or we've got certain practices that doesn't allow us to do that. And I find that is
right,
offensive. That I think most people, they would love to know that they're loved by their company as much as they want the company to love
right.
them as much as they love their company. And sometimes I feel like it's a one-way street. So I try to use
Right.
this
And
analogy of the
one of the things
citizen
I
farmer,
wrote
citizen
down is
soldier, to
you
maybe
put
give
in
some
there
people
also
some
in
pause
chapter
and go,
3 about
that's some
grow and
different language
defend,
I
right?
haven't
Like
heard before.
so
That might be
that
worth investing
reconciliation
or
of
or
having
exploring a little
those
bit more.
two roles going side by side, right? During leadership duties, right? You want to grow and then defend, right? So, what's the scoop on that? Because I found that very interesting how you put it in the book. I was like, so it made me think of it's like whole. I'm thinking like when I
Yeah.
was reading, I was like, oh wow, that's something like hold the line, like we in the foxhole. I'm thinking hold the line. Okay, you have this line now. You want to push forward and reclaim some more space. So that's the way how I took it. So how did you meant for it to come out in the book?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. I, yeah, I think that what you're referring to is where I talk about circumvallation, is the fort around the fort. And it was first, I mean, it was probably done well before Julius Caesar, but Julius Caesar famously used it against the Gauls in the Battle of Alesia. And what happened is when he was getting the Gallic chieftain was named Vectorogenics, and they had him on the run, and he holed up in the city of Alesia in the middle of France,
Uh,
and they had a huge wall that they had to build around the city, a siege wall. Well, then he got word that, wait, there are reinforcements coming, so he had to build a second fort to defend. And I use as an example because in business, you're going to have your siege walls where you're attacking, but don't forget that there might be reinforcements coming to relieve that, and you may need to have a battle on that side too. Because a lot of times when it comes to marketing, we're so busy
right.
focused on just go, 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 that we forget what the opponent's doing, in the rear. And so I use as an example of always keep your eyes open, like Caesar, because what ends up happening is you may have to spend some money
Uh,
defending, You may have to hire somebody to defend. You may have to get some more training to defend. And what ends up happening in a lot of cases for young leaders, they get told no. Well, we don't have that in
Right.
the budget, or we can't do that. And that's where these military strategies that I translate to mental models can be helpful, because
Right.
once you explain it that way, I never got denied, because people are like, "Oh, I don't want to. I don't.
Right. And that's where
We
you
just
move right
won this
into
territory.
force
Why would I want to give it
multiplication,
up?"
right? So we
You
talked
know. And
about this
so
before I
if you
hit the
don't
record button.
explain
Like
it and give it
it's good as
a
a
good
definitely as a
model, a good
veteran. Like you're a
description, it's
force
easy just to say,
multiplier.
"Yeah, we're not going to
You're
do that."
the Gerber tool. You're that multi tool that you have everything there just unfolded
Yeah,
and start to go with. So what makes someone a force multiplier on a team?
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that, in fact, I was going back and forth. I thought force multiplication might be the first chapter of the book, because that was probably the very first military strategy that I deployed when I was when I was working
Yes.
as CIO and CMO. And it was because when I got to foundations, a lot of their budget was going toward yellow pages, if you can remember back then. And this is back in 2008, 2009. And the yellow pages it was a valid marketing strategy. They had been around for years, but I knew coming in there that, wow, the world's changed
Mhm.
and people are on Google now. They're not doing the yellow pages.
Right.
And so the way that we were able to move budget and move the mindset with the leaders, because you got to remember, back then I was a lot younger, but the CEO and the board were older. So they're like, what do you mean we're going to shift into digital and we're not going to have yellow pages? That's where force multiplication was so important, because I was able to then translate to say,
Mhm.
listen, just like Karl von Clausewitz talked about during the Napoleonic times, and how really, if you think about Patton and the advent of armor, which is where I first heard about von Clausewitz as an armor school, was that we've got this one thing, so let's just do more with it, right? So and so that's what we started doing with digital
Right.
marketing. We said, if we're going to do an SEO article, a search engine optimized article for our website, why not interview a staff person? And while we're interviewing that staff person for the article, why not record it as a podcast? Why not also set up 2 cameras, record it as a video?
Yes.
And now we'll take some still photography for social. Oh, and now I can clip it
Yes.
and I can put it on Reels. I can put it on Shorts. I can put it on TikTok. I have now multiplied it across multiple platforms, but it's still just that one thing. Almost like von Clausewitz thought, if you're going to have that one soldier, put him on a horse, and also, instead of just the sword, give him a carbine. You know, that was his idea, and so I just applied that to marketing, and we were able to make
Right.
progress
Right.
because I explained it that way. All of a sudden, it wasn't just, well, Pepper wants to do TikTok. I don't
Right.
understand. Had nothing to do with TikTok.
Right.
It was force
One of
multiplication,
the
baby.
quotes I wrote down
We are
in this
force
chapter,
multiplying,
leaders
and
don't
it's
just
not
add
costing
value,
that
they
much more on the
multiply it,
budget. And all
right?
of a sudden, they're
It's
like, oh,
and
how do we get more of
you
that?
said it right there. Like, okay, so not everybody
Yeah.
is on TikTok, not everybody's on Instagram, but if you add
Yeah.
all those things, you're gonna hit different individuals at the same time, and it's the same information just on different platforms.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because, we
Right.
don't want to be so arrogant that we say, well, to our customers, you can only interact with me through LinkedIn, when maybe they're not on LinkedIn, maybe they're on TikTok. So why don't we go to where the customers are? So that was a lot of the what I was trying to get
Mhm.
across, and the force multiplication strategy is what allowed me to break through
Right.
with our leadership, who were older, didn't understand digital marketing, and also they now, instead of
Right.
worrying about the platform, instead of worrying, because they'll be
Right.
judgmental. Well, I thought TikTok was for little kids. Why would I? Now all of a sudden there was no conversation about TikTok or Instagram or anything. It was force multiplication, and where else can we force multiply?
Right.
And also, that's what's important too about your individual leadership.
Right.
Like, nobody's going to get that excited, if you're running a team or
Mhm.
leading a team, if you're just doing you're just one thing. Like,
Right.
but when you can have this force multiplication
And one of the great
mindset,
things
all
about
of a
one of the
sudden you become real
I guess
invaluable,
one of the things I
because
learned,
now it's
right,
not
is
just, well, Lee's doing the
before
one thing,
we
Lee's doing 10
deploy
things, for
or
God's sake.
going to a major event is you put in chapter 5 war gaming, right? Like, oh, war games, right? How does war gaming apply to the marketing campaign? Because we talk about having multiple streams, But now we come into wargaming, right? It's like planning out because you have the expected outcome, but you want to see how it, kind of people don't understand. Like if you can read about it, all day, but until you actually put into action to see what's going to be the second and third and fourth order effects of that one action, right? So explain what do you mean by wargaming? Because I have that knowledge. I was like, wow, this is phenomenal.
Yeah. 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 I mean, most companies that I've been involved with do not war game. And so the idea is that, and probably they sit there and go, well, why would I need to war game? But like, I'll use an example like with digital marketing, and we still do this with my clients, all the time. So let's say you've done a great job and you're ranking number one on Google for whatever your search, terms are that you're trying to optimize. You need to war game what happens if the algorithm changes and I drop off the first page. You need to have a plan. What happens? And most companies don't, and they get caught with their pants down, and then they're running around blaming people, and then that drives them to kind of make mistakes financially and trying to, fix it. But you can have those kind of war games. And so, we would sit there and say, well, if we drop off of Google, number one, okay, well, what's our fallback strategy? And we would say, like, we'll start dumping money into paid search. Great. We'll start doing things like we might do television, commercials in a local area. We had it documented so that when it happens, we've already practiced it, right? We know what our first step's going to be. So we're not struggling for days running around with our heads cut off. And a lot of companies don't do that, especially in the marketing realm. They're not practicing,
Yes.
these things that can happen. And it's not just even like a Google algorithm change. It could be what happens if a competitor opens up across the street. Like you can practice that. Well, here's what we're going to do if that happens. And it gives your team, I think, confidence, because it always can't just come down to you as the leader. If the brain trust for your company is everything in your brain, you're really missing out on leveraging all the other great things, all the great people you've got.
Yeah.
So that's where wargaming can really bring that out of these young people who are like, wow, I would do this or I would do that. And you're documenting, just like we do in the military. And I mentioned the sand tables. I mean, back when I was at Fort Knox, we still had sand tables and we would move the tanks around by hand. I mean, it's
While
not,
I was out in the field,
it sounds
my
charming,
instructor's like, hey, we're going to
but
have some
boy,
rock
it was
training.
effective because you know your
like rock
business.
training.
You start to know everything about your business.
Right. Yeah. And one of the quotes you had in chapter 5, like victory is
basic
rehearsed
training,
in
we
private
always had
before
the
it's
sticks.
celebrated
Yeah,
in public.
absolutely.
And that's part of wargaming.
Yeah. 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 That's where, people, people think, when great things happen, they're like, wow, that's amazing. It's not luck. We prepared, we trained for this. Nobody that I've been around goes into a training exercise, or a battle and it was just luck. Like, that there was a strategy, there was training, there was preparation, leading up to it. It's the same thing in the corporate world. And that's where you can really get these ideas across, because most CEOs I've come around worked with, they go, oh, I get that. I appreciate that. I like that.
Right.
That's one of these things where, this is the kind of conversation that veterans who are transitioning need to be having with potential company. It doesn't need to be, well, I was a
No, they
light
don't.
wheel vehicle mechanic and I only worked on track vehicles, or I only worked on 16-inch wheels. They really don't care about that. They really care
And you put
about
plans
these
or nothing.
this
Planning
higher
is
level thinking
everything.
that almost universally we have in the military.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it gets back to, a lot of things we were talking about earlier. Like if you don't have that freedom of movement, and if you can't communicate to your leaders in the military and then also in the corporate world that you are innovative, that you are creative, you take all the knowledge you've got and you can make decisions on the fly as necessary, that's really super valuable. I mean, most people who haven't been in the military, it's like when we first got there, it's like we may all want to think of ourselves with this warrior ethos, but listen, it was trained. We were trained. We didn't show up when I showed up to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I wasn't some superhero soldier. No, I mean we're trained, and it's the same thing with our corporate world. Like we can train these folks. If you've got people in your team and you're going, I don't know if they get it. Well, I would blame you as much as them. Have you trained them? Have you
Yes.
put them through a war game
Yes.
exercise? Have you, gotten
PMCS.
them
And
to,
that's where it comes
understand
into
how
when you roll
important
right into
PMCS
chapter
is,
6 and
whatever? I
talk
mean,
about the
it's
anvil and
really
the
on the
hammer.
leader.
Right? How do you apply pressure versus absorb it? Right? Because it's that thin line between love and hate, or a thin line between anvil and hammer.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great analogy too. I wanted to write. I wrote about this because
Mm,
a lot of times in business, you've got this tension, right?
mm,
Between with your finance team, they're wanting to drive profit, and
right.
you're the revenue generating side with marketing, but then you got finance. It's always trying to figure out where they can cut. And this is where Anvil and Hammer helped me personally a number of times because when they would say, "Well, Lee,
Mm,
we want this channel doesn't look like it's performing very well." Well, I would explain it like that's our Anvil. You can't just always have hammers. And the hammer doesn't work unless you have the anvil. And when I would give them the Schwarzkopf story, and they would just sit there and go, okay, I give up, Lee. I understand. Because a lot of times as young leaders, you will be you might get
mm,
overwhelmed by the CFO in that example I use in the book, and they'll say, well, I want you to cut that. Well, if you don't explain it in the way like with a hammer and anvil, if that's what you're doing, then you're ripe to be cut.
yeah.
And then in 2 or 3 months, they're going to be yelling at you, why isn't it working anymore? And you're going to go, well, it's not working because you did away with the anvil. And so that's where I think, again, it's not so much the individual tactics that you're worried about. It's
Right.
this
And then
overarching
definitely
strategy.
balancing
And if
those
you
tough
communicate it that
decisions
way,
with
you'll
team
kind of
trust.
insulate yourself and
That's
allow
that's
you to be
that's
more
that hard point.
successful.
So um what's some of the recommendation, or what's the scoop on trying to do that
Yeah.
tough decision, and still building that team trust? Right.
Yeah, I think communication is so important. I mean, I think that you have to share this with your team. If you like in the example I used with hammer and anvil, if you're going to use that as a tactic in marketing, it needs to be communicated to the team. They need to know the hammer and anvil story as much as you do, right? And it needs to be all the way down the line. And I mean that gets right back into commander's intent too. But I mean, I think that's how if you've got like in my situation, my entire teams in multiple companies,
Right.
they can all if you ask them, tell me what Lee's favorite military strategy is, they will always tell you force multiplication. They'll just say force multiplication. They know
Mhm.
it. And so it's important that we share these things all the way down because I find that most of
Mhm.
them crave it. They love the
Yeah,
stories and now
huge.
they're like,
And
wow, I've got
I
this
really love
analogy.
when you
I
put in
can
the
I
book,
can
the anvil
understand that.
doesn't
So I
move,
think communication
but it
is the biggest
shapes the
piece.
hammer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure my friends that were in Seventh Corps and the 101st Airborne,
Right.
they love to take credit, for the Saddam's highway of death there when we annihilated them,
Mhm.
but it was the anvil that allowed that to happen. Like it was not going to happen unless you lined up all of our forces on the Saudi border, like Schwarzkopf did. And I
Right.
think that that's important that you communicate that, like in your businesses,
Right.
because you're going to have teams that might not be,
Right.
everybody wants to work on the social media team. Like everybody, I mean, most companies I work, that's
Right.
the fun part. Who wants to sit there and be the person developing the website in the closet? That doesn't seem fun, but that might be your anvil, and they need to be celebrated because the social media
Mm.
might not have worked if you didn't have a great anvil. And so that's where communicating the strategy and the value and recognizing the contributions
Wow,
are super important because
that's huge.
otherwise you
And
get other departments that might
man,
want to
it's
come in
so
and cut it.
many
They don't
great
understand the
nuggets in your
contribution.
book, and I'm just gonna put it up here because I know some people are tuning in. So right here, because don't forget to like and subscribe. But definitely, we're gonna talk about how they're gonna get a copy of your book. But one of the things I seen that it resonated with me. You said steel sharpen steel, iron sharp. I'm thinking once I seen that steel sharpen steel, my brain said iron sharpens iron. But then you came back and said, but not without sparks. That's huge. Explain that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I
Mm.
think that a lot of times people in the corporate world get their feelings hurt.
Right.
And I think that in the
Yeah.
military, I think we're pretty
Right.
good. We might say some stuff. It's not personal, it's business. And I think that that's important for people in the corporate world to understand. Like our tone sometimes might not always be perfect. We might be very direct, and they need to understand that that doesn't mean that they're doing a bad job or they're any lesser.
Mhm.
And it's okay to have that kind of debate, if you will, that kind of disagreement. It can be healthy. And I think that that's something that sometimes people think that maybe in the
Right.
military we just take the orders and go along. It's like, no, a lot of times there's vehement disagreement
Right.
about a strategy or a path that you're going to take or a direction, and that's okay. It can be healthy in that
Right.
way,
And
and I
definitely
think that
with
that's an
also they
important
can learn from,
lesson
I
that a
call it
lot
the
of
S2
civilian
community, right? The
companies can
intel
learn
community, right?
from.
So what types of, and that's in chapter 7 of your book, right? What types of intel do modern marketers overlook?
Yeah,
Like, like you said, like go out there and do your market research. Like we don't want to be the next blockbuster, right? Like, so yeah, what's the
yeah,
scoop on that?
yeah, yeah. They don't
Mm.
a lot of small to medium-sized companies don't do intelligence. And so they won't ghost call, the other company, or they won't drop in the other restaurant and see how their service is or what their menu's like. And I think that's where it's super important to be able to have that knowledge,
Mm.
because that's what you're going to base, your strategies on, your plans on. And a lot of places they feel like they have to
Mm.
hire like a consultant maybe to do it. I don't know.
Mm.
But I think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of intelligence gathering that can be done. And that was why I put that in the book. I wanted
Mm.
people to understand that this is a practice that you can do.
Right.
It's
And
totally
why
within
does
your
data
wheelhouse. You
without
don't have to have a
context lead to
department
bad
that's going to
decisions?
go
Like,
do that.
I mean, you said there, right? So you don't want to, like, say if we talk about food, right? So say if the burger is not, that area doesn't eat a lot of red meat, but they eat a lot of vegetables or chicken. Like, you don't want to have your whole menu full of different type of
Yeah.
burgers when it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, I'll go back to the Yellow
Mhm.
Pages example. I mean, when we were transitioning all of the spend from traditional Yellow Pages to
Right.
digital marketing, I couldn't just come in there and say day one, this is what we're doing. We had to get the data. So we
Mm.
used a service in our phone system where we could tag every toll free number, so that we knew how many calls we got from digital, and we knew how many calls we got from the Yellow Pages. We knew how many calls we got from television, and I let the data be the bad guy. All of a sudden, we saw that what they thought was driving the leads was only
Wow.
delivering 10%. Yellow Pages is only accounting for 10% of our
Right.
phone calls. And all of a sudden, it's not Lee Pepper hates the Yellow Pages or Lee Pepper thinks I'm old. Had
Right.
nothing to do with that. It was, wow, look at this data. Let's do more of that. And so if you let the data be the bad guy, it takes the personal part out of it, because there's going to be times that there might be other
Mm.
departments that might have some hand in something, or heaven forbid, if you've got like a family member,
Right.
maybe the CEO's nephew is in charge of this over here. Like, you got to be careful. You don't want to step on those landmines. But if you let the data inform your
Right.
decisions, then that takes the personal out of it. So I think
Right.
that's
And
that's
that's where you
why
put clarity in
intelligence
the
is super
final product
helpful in
of
getting
good
real
recon.
data.
It's the final product. So you do good recon, so now you have clarity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and listen, a lot of
Mm.
people are going to say, "Well, I don't have a Salesforce.com, or I don't have a HubSpot." Well,
Yep.
listen, you have Microsoft Excel, you have Google Sheets. You can still do it old school. You can still collect the data. You can still mine it to make decisions and communicate it up the chain. I mean,
Wow.
listen, Southwest Airlines was developed on the back of a napkin. Herb
Wow.
Kelleher
Really
threw it
on the
out on
back
a
of a
napkin.
napkin.
So think about what you can
Wow.
do.
So that goes counter certainty. So I'm thinking like
Yep, yep.
intel, we have counter intel, certainty, counter certainty. So relate to how can that relate to like the company culture?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people sometimes
Mhm.
get counterinsurgency and intel sometimes kind of confused. And so that's why I wanted to write about counterinsurgency because I served for a number of years
Yep.
in a civil affairs battalion. In fact, I'm sporting my shirt today, the 49th Civil Affairs
Mm,
Battalion. And that's where counterinsurgency was so important. We need to understand, like, once we've moved in and
right,
won, we need to understand, okay, well, what are the insurgents going to do now? And that's where I
right,
share some of the examples of some of the failed strategies that we had. But it's the same thing in marketing. I mean, you might go win a geography, you might become number one in a certain search term, or you might be number one in a city or town. Okay, now
right.
you need to understand, okay, what are the opponents
Mm,
now doing? You can't just assume they're going to sit still. And a lot of times in the corporate world, we
right,
just think, well, we won this quarter or we won this year, and they don't realize that what's coming, because you may have to keep investing, you may have to keep being innovative or keep addressing it, and that's where counterinsurgency is super important in my opinion.
right. And
Don't
the
just
role
just
of
because you've
soft
planted that
power in
flag,
tough
don't think
environments.
it's always going to be
How does
there.
that play into the into the navigation?
Well, I
Mm,
Yeah, I find that at least like where I have worked for a
right,
number of years, we would roll in and we could dominate in digital pretty quickly. We had a great team. We had some amazing staff. I mean, Sherry Carter was our main web developer. And Wendy Lee Netwig was our editorial. They were amazing people. And once we won, we had to then
mm,
quickly then shift though to make sure that how do we maintain, and that you have to explain that in your budget and you have to explain that to your C suite, because a lot of times companies will go, we won, so let's start cutting. And it's like, no, we're doubling down. We want to maintain. We cannot give the
right.
insurgents, any kind of opening or they'll exploit it. And if you can explain it that way to your board and to your C suite or to
Mm,
your leadership partners, they start to
right.
understand, oh
And
yeah, that makes a
one of
lot
the
of
other
sense, Lee. It's not like they're just going to give up. And that might mean shifting some tactics. So a lot of times, when we would come in and dominate in digital, then all of a sudden we would shift more of our dollars to business development. So we wanted to have more boots on the ground so they could go in and start developing
right,
even tighter personal relationships, with therapists or psychiatrists or hospitals. So we could win it on the front with digital, but to maintain it, we needed to
wow,
have more of a presence with professionals and with alumni. And so that's just something you have to communicate and be open. It's not maybe what
wow.
won you the
And
battle
you
is
put
not
in
going to
there
be what
too is
maintains it.
I'm gonna hitch the train, the next train card onto it, like you had said in the book. Not all battles are loud. Some are won in whispers. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I think it's important for you to communicate within your company, what's going
Right.
on, but there's maybe some things you don't want to advertise that you're doing, and so, you want to be mindful of that. Maybe that'll be
Yeah.
an
I
additional
tell
book
you,
where
hey,
I
you
talk about
coming back, I tell
operational
you, cause like
security,
I could
maybe.
go like I'm navigating through this book and it's like I almost have the whole book highlighted. Like another one that you put in there, like soft power, hard impact. Like that is like I don't know, my brain is wired. Like I'm more of a visual person. So like when I see these highlights that I call them hot book highlights, right? Something that's a memory jogger for me. I like, wow, that's because you could
Yeah, yeah,
use that in
yeah.
different environments.
Yeah, it's funny. I was turning to your that chapter on counterinsurgency, and
Yeah.
one of the very, I think I think the second page in that chapter, because I love this quote by General David Petraeus, but his quote is arguably the
Mm,
decisive battle is for the people's minds, and I think that that's where that's something that was ingrained in me,
right.
working in a civil affairs battalion for many years, but I tried to make sure that I communicated that to my team too, because
Hmm.
that's where sometimes, especially in healthcare and in behavioral healthcare, we have to always
Right.
explain that we're not selling widgets, right? We're dealing with families, and so we have to win the hearts and the minds versus just trying to get them to buy a widget per se. And I think that when you can communicate as a young leader, maybe who hasn't been in the service, but or if you are in the service, this is important how you can communicate these things to your leaders. Because when I would say that quote to somebody who was a CEO or COO or CFO that hadn't
Right.
served, that really resonated. And they were like, I understand what you're saying now, Lee. And I think I talk about in the book that you have to
Yes.
be transformational, not
Yes.
transactional. And I think that when you're thinking about your military service, think about the leaders that you would,
Right.
and I'm going to
Right.
say die for, but you know what I mean. I mean, that you would take that hill for, that you would come in on
Come in early,
Saturdays,
leave late.
that you,
Yes.
I mean, that's a transformational leader, right? That's a transformational leader. And that's what we're trying to get
Right.
to, because we've all worked for
Right.
transactional leaders and we wouldn't do squat for them. But the transformational leaders, we were there for it. So that's the kind of leadership you want to instill in your team, and that's the kind of company that you want to have. And when you can
Mm.
communicate it that way, most of the time
Yeah,
the
definitely
people I've worked
working
with, they
with
love that.
allies. That's chapter 9 of your book. So I look at this as a force multiplier as well, right? Working with
Yeah,
allies, somebody that's on your same mindset. So the distinguish between ally and liability and partnerships. Like,
yeah. I think a lot of people think about corporate. They don't think
oh,
about it in
okay,
the case of allies, and that's where I was trying to lay out this case. A
got
lot of
you.
times it has to be a business arrangement.
Hmm.
Well, do I have a contract? Do I have a
Mm,
contract with them? And when you think about it in the military, we have allies. We don't have
yes, that's true.
contracts with them.
That's true.
Yeah, they're our allies. They support, and so it can happen in the corporate world too if you'll look at it that way. Not everything has to be quid pro quo. Not everything has to be contractual. And I use the example of
Yeah.
Red Bull and
Yes.
GoPro. They are allies. They do a lot of co-branding and cross-marketing, and they're not worrying about, well, did I get paid for this, or am I
Right.
under contract for this? No, it's because they love each other's market. It's very similar type people, so they want to support each other. And I think companies can really learn a lot from that, instead of always trying to figure out, well,
Right.
I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. Well, how about figure out who your allies are, the ones
Right.
that would go to war with you, and that's the kind of people that you wanna help them, and they're gonna help you too,
Right.
whether
And
it's
that's why I
under
think about
contract or not.
since we're on the food stuff, I'm thinking about peanut butter and jelly, hamburger and French fries, stuff that just goes together. Stuff that goes together, it just like we said, it
Yeah,
makes sense. GoPro and Red Bull, right? Because you think about all the extreme sports and stuff, they gotta record it. So, it
yeah,
just it makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah, and every company is they know who, and when if they'll just think about it this way, they'll go,
Mm,
"Oh, that I over here, they're our ally." Well, go
right,
maybe put them in your social media. Maybe you do something on your blog for them.
right.
Maybe you do a call out without even asking for anything. You just love them. And
Mm,
I find that there are certain companies that love you
right.
as much as you love your company. And so that's what you want to find. And I think that that can be, you talk about it's another multiplier. I mean, if you've got other companies or businesses
Uh-huh.
that are celebrating your wins and your victories, and you're celebrating their wins and victories, guess who's going to be
Yeah.
there when times get
Yes,
tough?
they will.
They're going to be there for you too, just like you're going to be there for them. And I think that that's where a lot of companies miss out on looking at these partners. If they would look at them as allies, it
Right.
could
And
be
you
so
said
much more
trust
beneficial.
is the currency of collaboration. That sums it up right there, what we just talked about.
Yeah,
Trust is the currency
yeah,
of collaboration.
yeah, yep. And we're always trying to figure out, well, how can we spend it?
Right.
Well, it's that way. If you're an ally, yeah, they're gonna spend it on you, and you're gonna
Yeah,
spend it on
100.
them.
And then rolling, operational readiness. This is when I call it the rubber meets the road. You ready to
Yeah,
execute? What does operation readiness look like in a startup? Like like somebody, because this is where I've seen a lot of active duty like start to do the transition. Right, they start like, man, how I don't know
yeah.
where to go. I don't know what I need to do. I want to start my own business. I want to. How does that look?
Well, and I want to
Sure.
show the audience, if those are watching on YouTube, but I mean, look at that bus. And so, when I was writing this chapter, I remembered landing in Columbia, South Carolina,
Nice.
and then, being picked up, and we were put on that
Yes.
Bluebird bus, Fort Jackson. And so I write about that, and everybody's experience is a little bit different, but you get the bags thrown off the back of the bus, at least they did, 30 years ago. But I think operational readiness is super important because I use the example
Mhm.
of the
Yes.
M16. And a lot of times we are really quick to purchase
Mhm.
software solutions, as an example. We're really quick to go buy Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever. And then we wonder a few months later why it didn't solve our problem, why it didn't fix our problem. And so I use the example of it happened in the military,
Mhm.
So the the M16 was rolled out
Mhm.
during the Vietnam War, and it performed very poorly the first few years that it was in the hot, humid jungle conditions of South Vietnam. And what they realized was that they did not train the troops on proper cleaning, and they did not send
Cleaning kit.
cleaning kits
Yeah.
with every rifle. And during my research for my book, I was always laughing that you spend more time cleaning your weapon than you do
Yes.
firing it. And it's because of this, what happened in Vietnam with the M16, and that's why we're still, they ingrain in you that you're going to spend all this time cleaning, and it's part of, I think, operational readiness. There's no
Right.
shortcut. You can't just buy Salesforce and then not fund training, then not fund hiring a Salesforce administrator, right? The tool isn't going to just fix it if your systems are broken. And that was the issue with the M16. The systems were not there; they were broken. And so, even though you had a very innovative weapon for its time, very advanced, it didn't perform well, to the point that American soldiers were throwing the M16 away and grabbing the AKs from the dead. I mean,
Yes.
it's crazy, but it's what happened. And so I use that very story when I'm talking with consulting clients now, and they'll start talking about wanting to bring in all these tools. I'm like, that's great, but let's start here. Let's start with your systems first, because just layering something over a broken system is not going to
Definitely
work.
not going to work. It's going to make it
Yeah.
worse, right? So now you have to rebuild and
Yeah.
start all over from if we would just do it right the
Yeah.
first time. So I know we coming close to the top of the hour,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and
absolutely. Yeah.
so I'm going to pull up this I call it a manuscript of knowledge and key insights. So how can they get a hold of this? How can people reach out to you? How can they get a copy of Never
Absolutely. Yeah.
Outmatched?
Well, I appreciate that plug. It's available in bookstores nationwide. You can also get it on Amazon. You can get it online, Barnes and Noble, Target, Costco. It's going to be in airport bookstores the month of December. And you can always get in touch with me through neveroutmatched.com is my website. And I'd love for people to connect with me on LinkedIn. And they can follow all my socials, Instagram and TikTok, what have you. But I'm also going to be doing a TED Talk November 8th in Ocala, Florida. And I'm going to be talking in elements of my book. And so a lot of it, the title for that event is called Pivot. And that's
Oh,
probably why I got selected, because a lot of what I talk about, is you have to have that ability in life to pivot. And so
yes.
I've got a nice TED Talk that I prepared for that. And then I'll be at a conference in Arizona in December and Washington, D.C. in December. So if you connect with me, I'd love to meet and help anybody I can.
Man, I appreciate it, Lee. So before we go, I just want to share, like, some of y'all don't have the book yet, but y'all gonna get it. But just let me share what some people have said, and Lee Publisher put it on the book. It says, Never Outmatched is a brilliant fusion of battlefield discipline and modern marketing insight. Lee Pepper brings a commander's clarity to business strategy, arming leaders with the mindset and models needed to win in uncertain, high pressure environments. But wait, there's more. Whether you're on stage, on screen, or in the boardroom, confidence, preparation, and adaptability are everything. Never Outmatched reads like a script for powerful leadership. Lee Pepper shows how to own your space, command attention, and move with purpose. It's a must read for anyone who wants to lead with both strength and grace. But wait, there's more. In today's era, and constant disruption, leaders don't just need inspiration, they need a real world playbook. Never Outmatched delivers exactly that. This isn't theory, it's a battle tested blueprint for building resilient, innovative, and unshakably competitive organizations. If you're serious about thriving in time of chaos, change, and relentless competition, this book is just a great read. It's essential. They said it right here. Just in case y'all think I'm reading from, no, it's published. So I highly recommend you go and get this book because it's going to add value to your life. It's going to add value. Remember, you do not have to drown in the sea of transition. Trust me. I'm living proof for that.
Yeah,
Grab that VET
absolutely.
S.O.S. lifeline. Grab that VET S.O.S. lifeline. Lee is here to help. He told y'all to connect with him. I'm here to help. Connect with me. Connect with VET S.O.S. Remember, we are here to help. So until next time, peace.